What are you going to do when you get home, Mr. President? What are you going to do when you get home?
Sit down.
Just to recap then, there has been an assassination attempt on President Reagan. The president has been hit. He has a wound, we believe, in his upper shoulder. His condition, according to the White House, is stable. We do not believe that the president's life is in any danger. His assailant is in custody, or his suspected assailant is in custody. For news on that assailant and for news of any possible motive, we're still waiting. This is Norman Reese, News at 10 in Washington. Mr. Bush was getting his first taste of what it's like to head the White House crisis management team as he waited to greet Dutch Prime Minister Andreas van Acht. And there was no doubt of who was in charge. After some talk yesterday from Secretary of State Alexander Haig that he was running the White House in the absence of the president, he found himself very much on the sidelines today with the Vice President in clear control. Some senators also called on the Vice President to get a briefing on the situation. They left expressing admiration for the way the Secret Service had handled the crisis and declaring that no president can be fully protected.
As horrible as it may be, that is part of the risk that a man or a woman must take as president, and that is the risk of an assailant's bullet.
The Reagan administration has clearly been trying to demonstrate today that the shooting of the president has not seriously interfered with the running of the country. Mr. Reagan himself has been celebrating his narrow escape from death by quoting Winston Churchill. There's no more exhilarating feeling than being shot at without result. Norman Reese, News at 10 in Washington.
President Reagan has been making what officials here say is astounding progress. He watched the Academy Awards on television last night, and despite some discomfort from his chest wound, he was out of bed and walking about a bit this morning. So, as the sirens and flashing lights of yet another Washington motorcade announced the arrival of his wife, Nancy, the president was in good spirits and talking about plans to visit California later this month. Tight security is in force all round the hospital, part of which has been turned into a presidential office, complete with communications equipment, even a shredding machine for excess paperwork. But can government be run from a hospital room?
The president is fully capable, as he's demonstrated since yesterday, of making decisions and taking actions. Now, the one thing that cannot be business as usual, of course, is the president's ability to travel, to go, for instance, to address the state legislature in Illinois, to present his economic program. We had to cancel that trip, but we've had to cancel relatively few events on the schedule. Vice President Bush has picked up the slack in many instances.
Meanwhile, flowers and telegrams from staff and friends were delivered to Mr. Reagan's room in the center of the hospital. And although he couldn't see them, messages of goodwill were hung from office windows outside. So the wheels of government are turning more or less normally. And President Reagan could well be making a television appearance to reassure the nation from the White House in about a week from now. Sam Hall, News at 10 in Washington, D.C.
Hinckley, who was wearing a bulletproof vest, spoke only once during his appearance, replying, "Yes, sir," when he was asked if he knew what it meant to forego a preliminary hearing on the charges. In the meantime, more details have emerged of his bizarre obsession for teenage film star Jodie Foster and his motive for the shootings. Today's Washington Post carries the text of a letter Hinckley wrote to Miss Foster just before the attempted assassination. "Dear Jodie," Hinckley wrote, "there is a definite possibility that I will be killed in my attempt to get Reagan. I've got to do something now to make you understand in no uncertain terms that I'm doing all of this for your sake. By sacrificing my freedom and possibly my life, I hope to change your mind about me. This letter is written an hour before I leave for the Hilton Hotel. Jodie, I'm asking you to please look into your heart and at least give me the chance with this historical deed to gain your respect and love. I love you forever." Meanwhile, the FBI now believes that the bullets fired at the president were of a special kind, called devastators, designed to explode on impact. The one that ricocheted off the car and pierced the president's lung was intact, so it probably failed to work. but the wounds of Mr. Reagan's press secretary, Jim Brady, and Secret Service agent McCarthy did provide evidence of fragmentation.
The x-ray was taken at 7 o'clock this morning. The results were apparently red, and it was known at least a couple of hours ago that the president would be getting out. Dr. O'Leary warned that he might look a little bit thinner, and here he comes now, dressed in a red sweater. And he's coming out the front door with his daughter, Patty Davis, and Mrs. Reagan on his arm, both dressed in red. And what are you going to do when you get home, Mr. President? What are you going to do when you get home?
Sit down.
The president steps gingerly into the car and says when he gets home to the White House, he's going to sit down. And apparently...
His limousine has just pulled up here at the... smiling and waving with his left hand. President continuing to wave with Mrs. Reagan there at his side and daughter Patty Davis. After 12 days, the president back here at the White House. He, of course, was expected to be here 12 days ago at about 2:30 in the afternoon. That's when the assassin's bullet rang out. And, of course, the president then was taken immediately to George Washington Hospital. There was a kiss from Mrs. Bush there, and then the vice president stepping briefly into the picture. A lot of well-wishers just outside the diplomatic reception. This is where foreign dignitaries are usually greeted when they arrive at the White House. The president now going inside, and we are told, you see now the banner, "Welcome Home, Mr. President," which is just over the entranceway there. And so the president is now back home. He didn't seem to mind.